Okay, so we're moving on to our next sentence in Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene by Ellen White, page 109. This is what it says. There are many invalids today who will ever remain such because they cannot be convinced that their experience is not to be relied upon. Okay, so this book was written within the context of health discussions. Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, the title kind of lets that on. So here, Ellen White is referring to invalids, people who can't really take care of themselves, who are physically disabled in some way. And she says, again, there are many invalids today who will ever remain such because they cannot be convinced that their experience is not to be relied upon. Now, to reverse that, if someone could be convinced that their experience is not to be relied upon, they may be able to get out of being an invalid. In other words, the principle that she's trying to communicate here is that many people end up in a place where they are depending on others to care for them, when if they would choose not to rely on their own so-called experience, they could end up taking care of themselves. So, for instance, many people, if they have some sort of accident or some sort of injury or some sort of disease that comes over them, and they end up just sitting back and getting, more and more inactive, end up believing, oh, I can't do this, I can't walk, I can't prepare my own food, I can't do these things because I had this accident, or oh, I had this horrible thing happen to me, I had this disease that has come upon me. Well, you know what, if we take that and the fact that, let's say there was a short time where we actually couldn't walk, and we take that experience as the indicator of our whole life and our whole possibility, then we may never try to walk, and we may lose the ability just by our muscles going into atrophy. Now that would not be good. That's not going to help someone. But if they take the position that, hey, you know what, their experience is not to be relied upon, and hey, look, I had something bad happen to me. Yeah, it's true that I couldn't walk, but I'm not going to let that rule me. No, I am going to walk. I am going to go through recovery, and I'm going to walk. If someone takes that mindset, it's more likely that they're going to walk. This isn't to say that everyone who loses the ability to walk will be able to walk again. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. Perhaps that's changing. There are some amazing things in modern technology where, hey, people who have never walked or who have not walked in years are now being able to walk. And that's just absolutely wonderful. But again, it's the mindset that we take makes a big, big difference. So it all comes down to how we view experience. So anyway, let's move on to the next sentence here. Erroneous habits and customs gird men and women as with iron bands, and they too often justify themselves in these customs by what they term experience. So I think we've already expanded on this principle a little bit earlier when we looked at habits. Experiment or so-called experience, which actually is just a result of mere habit or a course of indulgence thoughtlessly and often ignorantly followed. So here we have that same sort of idea being conveyed. Erroneous habits and customs gird men and women as with iron bands. So people end up doing things by tradition or by habit, and they end up going with it, and they just stick with it. And, I mentioned with religion too, people do this same thing. They have their tradition, they have their religious belief, they've grown up with it their whole lives. All of their brothers and sisters, their parents, their uncles, aunts, grandparents, friends are all in this religious belief, and they've never had anything else, and it has given them a good life, let's say. Well, if they take that as their experience, and have that be a testament to them of how their religion must be true, well, they won't necessarily be moved by something else. Those customs, those habits, will end up binding them unless they allow themselves to think in a different way, to take evidence as the determining factor as to what they will believe. So again, the reason why we know that that's not a, going by habit tradition is not a reliable means of arriving at truth, is because many people follow many different habits and many different customs and end up with radically different and even conflicting conclusions. That's enough to show us that that method is not reliable for arriving at truth. So the next sentence here says, many of the grossest habits are cherished under this plea. So in Ellen White's day, some of the things that she was referring to were things like smoking tobacco, chewing tobacco, drinking, those sorts of things. Those sorts of habits are clung to because people have an experience with them. And hey, let's just face it, back when this was written in the late 1800s, people didn't acknowledge or talk about, or to some extent know, how bad smoking and chewing tobacco really is. It was a more common idea that this stuff is at least not too bad for you and perhaps even good for you. People had these conceptions. Many fail to reach that physical, mental, and moral development to which they might attain because they cling to an experience that is opposed to the plainest revealed facts. Okay, so if we cling to something, we form some sort of sentimental attachment or emotional response connected to a certain thing, and allow that to bind us, then we will totally ignore the evidence and just go with that and ruin ourselves, damage ourselves and others as a result. The next sentence says, men and women whose wrong habits have destroyed their health and broken down their constitution will be found recommending their experience as safe for others to follow, when it is this very experience that has robbed them of health and vitality. I don't think I really need to comment much upon that. I think that we have all seen that happen, whether we have recognized or not. Perhaps we have participated in it, recommending something to others. Oh, look, this is good. My experience tells us this. And I have done this. I have done this where I have had what I consider to be a good and genuine experience and ended up recommending things to others based on that so-called experience when that very thing was actually very bad for me. Again, if we really care about others, if we have love for others, we will want only genuine experience. What would be, if anyone watching this, if you find yourself resistant to the idea of needing experimentation in order to know something and in order to validly promote something, if you find yourself resistant to that, ask yourself why. What would be so bad about making sure by experiment? Doesn't it sound like a good idea, So, anyway, we'll go on to the next sentence here. When you seek to instruct them, they defend their course by referring to their experience. Again, this happens all too often. People will defend whatever they're doing or whatever they're promoting because of, another way that we could put it is an anecdotal story. And often this happens in alternative health or natural medicine, whatever term you want to put on it. But in the alternative health field, so often when presenting a product, people do not present experimental data. They do not present scientific knowledge or a scientific presentation. They tell anecdotal stories. So, well, this person tried it and this is what it did for them. Well, this person did it and this is what it did for them. Okay, well, you know what? Yes, having a testimony can be good. And if you really did do something and it really made a difference for you, it makes sense as to why you would want to share that. But the point is, you could have a false experience. You know, you could have a placebo. You could take a sugar pill and get better, just thinking it's something else. Does that mean you should recommend placebo to people? No, it's not really fixing it, you know? It's just a sugar pill. So here's the thing. Even if you do find something that is really valid and it really changed you in terms of a health issue, let's say, it really improved your health, well, really, the thing that you can do to help someone the most is not to bear your own personal testimony as to how it improved your health. That can be included, but you should present to them the scientific evidence as to why the product works. That's what really matters. Because you can't, well, I'll just say it wouldn't be right for you to expect someone to depend upon your telling of your experience. You know, I mean, other people might have a different experience. So that's not what it comes down to. While that may be important and helpful and powerful for yourself, and while it may be helpful for someone to hear your own experience, it comes down to the physical happenings of the interaction between that product or that element and the person's body. That's what it comes down to. That is where the proof or disproof lies. So again, if you really want to help someone, yeah, sure, if they're not a scientifically minded person, if they're not someone who cares about experiment, then maybe you do need to tell them your experience. But I think it's important to let them know not to depend on your experience, that they need to depend on something else, because otherwise, if they hear someone else who bears a more powerful testimony of some other thing, maybe that thing won't actually help them. So the important thing is to encourage a mindset which requires experimental knowledge. That way the person will be helped the most. That way the person will be able to evaluate their various options. And even if they don't have a complete understanding, as I certainly don't, of all the aspects of health and all of these various things when it comes to their particular issue, they will be able to think more soundly in considering their options. So that's what I would certainly recommend for everyone. The next paragraph is actually quite small, but there's stuff here for us to discuss, so I'll go on to the next sentence. Here is where we have met the greatest difficulty in religious matters. Okay, so notice the whole context here. Talking about experience and experimental knowledge and so on, Ellen White is saying that where she and others have met the greatest difficulty in religious matters is that people just rely on their so-called experience rather than on genuine experimental knowledge. And I'll just say, yes, absolutely, I totally agree to that. I can relate to what Ellen White is here saying. So, and I think throughout the course of this series, perhaps you can understand this already without me giving much explanation, because you know that most religious beliefs and most religious people are not founded in or upon experimental knowledge. It rather comes down to tradition or a bias of some sort, a habit, a culture, whatever it may be, and that's the foundation of the religious belief and system. So anyways, more to discuss. We'll have to continue on in the next video.